Hello, friends. Welcome to another brand new episode of Learn with Musa. I hope all of you are in good health and with a positive mindset. Please try to carry on with learning no matter what life brings to you. Okay, friends, I have done three tutorials earlier detailing about what is web services, how they are classified, etc. If you haven't watched them yet, I suggest you watch them first prior to this. The links are in description box or at top right corner now. That will help you a lot to grab concepts easily here. In this Everything about REST APIs tutorial series, we will learn more about REST APIs, keeping all the previous learning as a base. So at the end of learning this series, it will equip you to have a bigger picture about REST APIs in real world application development. It will also help you to read API documentations and use them effectively. You can know how REST APIs support CRUD operations in your web applications. And finally, you will be able to test REST APIs and related web applications effectively. So friends, to recap quickly what is REST API. It's a type of API developed with a guideline that follows RESTful architectural style in which method information and scoping informations are sent along with the request line itself. And we can find resources by hitting on a URL or URI. And you should be able to get a piece of data called a resource when you link to a specific URL. It is adopted commonly nowadays by the application developers and made available at application server for any other program or in that matter for the web apps to consume. We also learned that in REST API everything is being considered as a resource and the resources can be retrieved, created, modified or even deleted from the server over the network using HTTP protocol and methods. Each resource is linked to a specific URL and we can call each URL as a request because submitting a request is mandatory to either retrieve or to modify the resources. The data sent back by the server to you is called a response. So it's important to know that a request is made up of four things. What are they? Let's check. They are the endpoint, the method, the headers, and the body. We will learn each of those in detail in this tutorial series. First, let's check about the endpoint. The endpoint, or I would call it as a final route, is the URL you request for. It's the link by which you can reach to a particular resource present in the server. It will look like as the one shown in the screen for example. This endpoint can be divided into different parts or it is formed by joining root endpoint, path and query parameters. The root endpoint is the starting point of the API you are requesting from. Here you can see the root endpoint of the API that I have shown earlier. Mostly it's the host that provides the API service. Next, let's check about the path. The path determines the resource you are requesting for. We can have different paths to different resources provided by the same host. To understand what different paths are available to you, you need to look through the API documentation. Anyway, I'll demo this to you later. The final part of an endpoint is query parameters. Query parameters give you an option to modify your request with key value pairs. They always begin with a question mark. Each parameter pair is then separated with an ampersand, like the one I am showing in the screen. Okay friends, now the important question is, how do you know if this endpoint works? Well, it's time to give it a try. You can send a request with any programming language by writing a piece of code, or we can use the command line utility called curl. We can use curl because API documentations are normally written with reference to curl. If you understand how to use curl, you will have no problems understanding API documentations too. Or to simplify things to test the API, you can even use any web browser, say Google Chrome. You can hit the API URL just like how you open any website URL. Anyway, I will showcase testing the API using both curl and Chrome browser. So friends, I'll enter into demoing how we can test this Open Weather API. So friends, here is a very simple and straightforward example for an API endpoint. I have taken this endpoint from a company called Open Weather Map. They provides a great service. So if you wanted to know the weather conditions for any particular city, you can just hit on this API endpoint and it will give you all the details about the weather conditions. So you can customize this API endpoint by providing the city for which you wanted to get the weather information. So here I'm passing Chennai. So if you wanted to know the weather condition for London, you can simply pass it and this API will give you all the weather conditions. So how basically services like this are helpful? For example, assume that I'm developing a mobile app, and what this mobile app does is you can just search for any city and you can get to know the weather condition there. So you come across such scenarios, right, in life. For example, like you are traveling to any particular city, you need to know the weather condition there. So you just open this mobile app and you just search for that city, and the app can give you all the current weather condition there. So when I develop such a mobile web app, what I do is that I'll develop the UI, and in order to get all these relevant data, I would be depending on this API endpoint. So I can use this API endpoint. I can just maybe I just have to just pay this Open Weather Map company, and I can use the service. I don't have to develop any fetching weather conditions API or anything. All I have to focus is developing my mobile app in which I'll be embedding this API, and I can retrieve all those information. I can parse it, or I can nicely format it, and I can simply display it into the mobile app UI. So that is how different API endpoints and API economy works. So as a company, Open Weather Map, they can generate revenue as well by providing this endpoint. So anyway, what we are focusing is on just the API endpoint. So I'll tell you how we can test this. So as I mentioned earlier, we can use open source command line utility called curl. So you can use that tool and you can simply hit on this API. So I'll just go to curl and I'll show you that. So if you are not really aware about curl, curl is available in most of the operating system nowadays. So if you are using Windows 10 later versions, curl is built in there. So it's a command line tool. So if you are using Mac OS, it's also available there. So you just use curl and you just hit on this API endpoint. So when I hit on this API endpoint, I'm expecting some data to be retrieved from it. So I'm just hitting on it. So you can see that there is some response coming from here. And you can see that here I have passed city name as London, and you can see the response given here. So there are few informations given here. So as a mobile developer, what I would do is that I will simply use this information, I'll pass it and I'll nicely format it and display it in the UI. So that is how it works. And like I have mentioned earlier, you don't really have to use curl always. So if you wanted to use a browser, for example Google Chrome, you can hit on this API as well. So I'll show that as well. So I'm using Google Chrome here. What I'll do is that I'll simply paste that API endpoint here. I'll hit on it. So you can see that information has come back and it's nicely formatted here. So in the browser, I'm using a plugin called JSON formatter here. So it's nicely formatted and given here. So like we have been discussing in previous tutorials, you can understand that the response given by this API is in JSON format. It's nicely formatted here, right? So programs or applications can really understand JSON. They cannot understand HTTP, I mean, they cannot understand English or any other human languages, right? They can understand JSON or XML, etc. So once you supply this into any program or an application, they can understand it. They can, I mean, you can code it basically to format it and display it. So yeah, so this is how the API endpoint works, and as you know, we can see this is the root endpoint, and there are other parts here. So if you see, this is the path. So this is the path by which you are actually understanding the resource here. So here the resource is nothing but the weather information, and you are actually passing query parameters. So you can see that there is first query parameter where you are passing the city information, and there is another query parameter saying app ID. So this is a mechanism by which you are authorizing yourself. You are telling Open Weather Map that you are a genuine client, and there is an app ID here. So to get app ID, you may have to pay Open Weather Map, and you may have to sign up, and you may have to get it. So what you can see is that a nice response given by the open weather map. So open weather map might be giving a lot of endpoints, not just this. So how do you actually get to know about such endpoints? So what you can do is that you can just go to their API documentation and you can read it. So I'll just demo that as well. So I'll just go to Open Weather Map company, and you can see that they have nice API documentation. So if you go here, you can see API documentations here. So I'll click on API documentation and see they have given. So they have different endpoints available. You can get current weather data by passing a city name or a city ID, or you can even supply geographic coordinates, etc. So if you navigate there, you can see different endpoints given here. See, nicely they have given here. So they have also given some sample information. For example, like if you have a city ID and if you wanted to hit on it, you can just hit on with that. So you can see here that it's given like this. So the basic point is that there are API endpoints given by many organizations, and you can just utilize them. So I'll also give you one more API, and which is nothing but GitHub. You know GitHub, right? It's a popular source code management system. So GitHub has an API. So if you wanted to utilize it, you can just simply use those API endpoints. So if you go here, and this is basically GitHub's API documentation. So you go there and you can see the endpoints here. So this is the root endpoint. So I'll just use this root endpoint and I'll try to hit on it. So when I hit on it, see, I can see all the response coming from there, and there is another endpoint here. So I'll open that as well. So I'm getting an authentication message from GitHub. Obviously you need to authenticate, right? You need to authenticate, otherwise you will not be able to get information or the response from GitHub. So I hope you understood some basics about API endpoints, how it helps, how it looks like, so that I mean you can watch my other tutorials, upcoming tutorials, and you will learn more. So thank you guys for watching this demo. Okay friends, in this tutorial we learned about the API endpoints and understood that it's the link by which an API consumer can reach to a resource made available by the API provider. We also understood how to test them. I think that's enough for now. If I supply too much content to your brain, there are high chances for them to overflow. So friends, please take a break and have some coffee. We will continue our learning in the next tutorial, in which we will focus on request methods and other parts of the request. Till I catch you in the next tutorial, it's Musa signing off. Goodbye.